All right, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about building strength and how we do that. So, first and foremost, if you want to build strength, you need to have periodized training. Periodized training is essentially just having some type of structured training that's going to support a goal, right? Is you have a goal of building strength. What are you going to do? You're going to periodize your training out so that way you can make sure you're getting there. Ultimately, what that means is it's progressive in nature, right? So it's looking to build upon what we've been doing in previous weeks to get to the end goal. And also, too, what's going to help along the way is going to be having data there to help assist us in making those adjustments, right? There's going to be high days, there's going to be low days, there's going to be days where you feel good, there's going to be days where you feel bad. So we need to have some type of data there that's ultimately keeping us on the right path so that way we know when we have to throttle things up or throttle things down. So periodization, very big. Next thing too, right, is notice how I said there, it's structured training. It's not just working out. Training versus working out, there's a massive difference. Training, again, goal orientated, and there's a plan set in place to help achieve that goal. Working out, what often happens is it's more so just getting active to get active, right? It's sporadic. There's no real plan to it. It's more so, hey, if I can just get out and get a little bit active, boom, which honestly isn't bad, but especially if you're trying to really achieve something, is you need to have something a bit more specific than that. So for me, training versus working out is going to be no real plan. More often than not, ends up becoming very inconsistent because there is no plan. And ultimately, with that, you're destined to fail. You're not going to achieve the goals that you want because you're just kind of doing things to do it. So definitely focus on training versus working out. Next thing, developing a training plan, right? Is how do we do that? Well, kind of what I've been preaching this whole time is like in order for us to get to where we want to go, we need to know where we are starting, right? And that's going to be with that data that we're talking about up here in our periodization is we have to have some type of baseline assessments, right? So in this sense, whatever your primary movements are going to be, whatever deadlift, squat, bench press, maybe you're doing pull-ups, but is you have to get some type of bare assessment of where you at right now. So that's where some type of testing day would be, is you go in, you knock those out, that way and that's where the foundation starts from. And you're actually going to see in some of these next pages I have here what that's going to kind of look like and how we can map that out to make sure that we are essentially getting some progress from where we started. So also with the plan, very important to have a system that keeps you on track and accountable. Again, we're going to see that in some examples here, but that's the biggest thing, right? Is consistency. We said before, training versus working out. Working out, there is inconsistency there. So it's really being able to have something that holds you accountable so that way you can show up every day and keep working towards that goal, right? Another thing too, allocating the time. So that's something as well too. If you give yourself 45 minutes, but in all reality, maybe you need an hour and a half or an hour, is you need to make sure that you have enough time set aside for that so you're not rushing through it, you're not cutting corners, and making sure too as you're planning your day is that timeline or that time frame ultimately fits in there and it's not something that's going to be disturbed throughout the rest of your day. Let's see here. Oh, saying that I really, really love, right, is calling something a priority. Oftentimes we hear the word priority used in a plural instance, but if we look right here, right, is if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. You have to truly prioritize, keep that word singular to really make something happen. So again, when it comes towards building strength, or quite honestly, any important goal that you have in life is you have to make it a priority and you have to have everything else essentially revolve around that because that is the one thing you're working on. And this is something too, just for a little bit of reference, the word priority dates back to the early 1400s and it was used as, and still should be used as, a singular word that equates to something being the first one or the very first. So remember that when you're making something a priority or when you have a priority in life, it is the single thing that is the most important thing. If you're considering things to be priorities, you're doing it wrong because at the end of the day, you're taking away a lot of energy and then it's getting into, we can kind of have that debate on multitasking. Is it beneficial? But you're spreading out your focus to multiple different things. And again, you are losing the ability to basically maximize your time with that single thing. So anyways, bit of a ramble there, bit of a tangent, but anyways, still very important. So let's move this down. We were talking before as we had an illustration right here. Improving the strength gains is having some type of system. This was just made in Excel, just really, really simple. This would be something you could be able to use with your athletes or even yourself. But again, actually too, we're revisiting some of the strength metrics that we have, right? Is we have absolute strength and we have relative strength. So let's use this for an example right here in the hinge. You have your athlete that weighs 175 pounds. For them, their hinge variation that they're doing is a trap bar deadlift. The weight that they're pulling is 350 pounds, and they're completing 5 reps of that. We use a couple formulas here, and we're able to equate that out to a rough estimate of about 408 pounds for a 1 rep max. And then we have the relative strength there, which we talked about, right? Was just taking this number, dividing it by body weight, so we can see they have a relative strength of 2.33. Awesome. We've got our benchmarks right there. Another thing that I've added in as well too, though, is being able to see the training percentages. Don't necessarily think of red being bad, green being good, things of that nature, but it's more so just to kind of see like a progressive intensity scale. So you can see that when you're at 95% of a 1 rep max, this more so means intensity, like difficulty. So that is going to be good, and I'll get into it on my next slide as well, though, too, but is knowing what intensity zone you're training at and also what reps you're going to pair with that as well, too. We'll come to find that, let's say if you just throw something out there and you say, hey, I'm going to, or for this athlete, maybe they're going to pull 395 or 390, and somebody says, all right, we're going to do 4x10 and we're going to pull by that. Well, chances are, because you are so close to that 1 rep max, you're not going to be able to get that 10. So those are some things too that we kind of have to have some parameters on, is we have to know where things are going to flow within that. And I'll have to create some more videos on that, but at least for today, you can kind of see is this is an easy way to calculate the percentages, so when you're working at them, you're going to know what that's at. And the cool thing too, though, is granted this is in Word right now, I don't have it in Excel, but is if you go into Excel document that I have of this, you'd be able to type your weight in, the reps, and that's going to adjust this based on, if you're doing more, doing less, if you're increasing or decreasing your body weight. These numbers are all going to change respectfully. But again, you can get that idea of on any day-to-day, like where your number's at, you'll have an idea. Let's say maybe you're sitting here and you're supposed to be working at 75%. And as you're building up, maybe 250 pounds is feeling heavier. Or once you get to this weight, it's actually feeling pretty heavy. And you're supposed to do, I don't know, let's say like a 3x6 or 4x6, something like that. So maybe you lower it a little bit, but you notate that, and then you're able to see that over the long term. Very, very important, because that may lead us down the road of either we were too aggressive with our working weights that we're using. Maybe we're not getting enough sleep. Maybe the diet isn't in the right place. Maybe there are some things going on from a kind of like a mental side, right? Is maybe there's just some stress going on up there. So anyways, just a really good tool to help with that. Lastly, you can see too, right? I just used the example of having a hinge, a squat, a push, a pull for those primary movements that you're going to have. And again, you can see how this kind of equates. One thing to kind of consider too, though, dumbbell bench press. This is going to be total weight, so that would be the guys using 80 pounds for 8. Estimated 1 rep max at 203. This one over here is just a single. So technically this would be more weight that they're moving. This is relative. So I guess if you wanted to, this would be relative bilateral for 2 arms. This is relative unilateral for 1 arm. You could divide this by 2 and that would give you that. But either way, just something to kind of use, something to kind of be aware of, can be very important and essential within your training. All right, let's get on to the next one now, just to, again, kind of recap this, right? As we've kind of identified what we need to do to build strength, and I guess more or less kind of the mentality that we have to have when we're doing it. But something that's going to kind of give us a better idea of what this plan actually looks like is this is still, I guess we can say in the weeds a little bit, right? Like this is still a little bit of a zoomed in, more like day-to-day view here, right? But here is going to be more of a long-term view. So when we look at this, right, training parameters for intensity and reps, what this graph is showing is essentially what this has up here in this little chart. But you can see that week 1, let's just say, for instance, this is going to be for, again, the hinge pattern that you have. I didn't put sets. That's not really important right now. But total reps that are going to be done in your training session for week 1 is you're going to have an accumulation of 24 total reps. However those are set up, it's, not really important right now. But for tracking the reps, that is, because that's going into total volume. But you can see it's 24 reps. The max intensity that's reached is 80%. So you can see how there's this relationship, right? Just read the key down here. We got reps, we got max intensity. But you can see how this kind of goes to where if we take a peek back at this guy, when I was saying earlier, is if we're working at certain percentages and it's feeling heavy or maybe it's feeling light, we do have to make sure, though, that we have some type of relationship like this because that's ultimately how we're going to build that strength. If you, let's use the example, right, is for whatever reason you're not confident in yourself or just, for whatever reason you're cutting these short and maybe instead of having it go 80, 85, 90, and then down to 60. This would be ultimately a deload week here. Maybe you're going like 70, 75, 80, or whatever it might be. Is now you're kind of getting to this point, right? It's like we have higher intensities up here because this is ultimately what you need to gain that strength and that motor recruitment to be able to move more weight. But now you're not training at nearly as high of an intensity, so there's going to be less adaptation to the body. The body's not going to have nearly as much urgency to adapt because you're not pushing it as hard. Then you go into that deload, and we'd ultimately cut this guy down to, again, right about here, so there's a smaller difference. It's like the adaptation that you're going to get is going to be much less. Now, if you're somebody who hasn't been doing anything for a while, that's one thing, but especially if you're a high-level athlete, you're honestly, in that sense, you're detraining at that point. You're going to be losing because you're not maintaining these thresholds that we're looking for. So that's just an example of how kind of following this or what parameters we need to be around to make sure we're getting those. Another thing I'll say, this is an 8-week cycle. Technically, there'd be, phase 1 is the first 4 weeks. Phase 2 is the next 4 weeks. So I guess it's 2 phases. But we could write this out for a very, very long period, and just kind of depending on what type of training qualities you want to get into. And again, this will be something for another video later, but we can kind of dissect it that way. The last thing I'll say on this one, though, that you can see to kind of get an idea of what your training is going to look like, and I suppose to what we set up here, right, is when we're looking progressive in nature, here's that progression. That progression that's been built in there is you have 3 weeks of building, kind of accumulating intensity. The volume is fluctuating a little bit, right? You go from 24, 21, 23, and this is relative because, at least in this sense, like I would be looking to potentially use this as a test out week, so maybe you're doing plus or minus this because you'd have a set in there that you would try and go for like higher reps. But again, the idea is building, deload, and then we bump things up a little bit, right? Like bump it up 5%. Okay, now we're challenging the body more. Again, deload again. We can get into more down the road on what this cycle would actually look like, but this is just kind of a basic snapshot. Again, we wouldn't keep this linear. We wouldn't necessarily go to 100, 110%, because then we're really going to tax it, but it would be something cyclical in this nature of where we're going, moderate, then we're getting heavier. Maybe you do one more where you bump it up and we're doing 87.5, 92.5, 97.5, but then what we would want to do after that is we would probably want to revisit some type of unloading phase and just repeat it over again. But again, that's for more of a video down the road. So overall, that's what we have for today. Hopefully this helped you kind of get a better understanding of how we go about building strength and how it's going to help you. But I appreciate you coming by, and more video to come. Take care. Bye-bye.